Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. If you're the kind of focused learner who absolutely loves cutting through all the noise to get straight to the core of a complex subject, well, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating presentation. It actually builds this remarkable bridge between high-tech modern military strategy and ancient practices of spiritual discernment. It's a deep dive into how we process information, whether that's data flashing on a screen or just a quiet prompting in our minds. So, let's get right into it.
To really understand the core of this presentation, we first have to start with the problem of decision-making in a completely chaotic world. Picture a high-stakes modern military command center. Just think about the sheer volume of data being processed in a room like that. In any crisis, whether it's a military operation, a corporate disaster, or even a major personal crossroads, we are constantly bombarded with overlapping, confusing, and often totally contradictory signals. The creators of our source material point out that to survive and actually succeed in all that chaos, you need a centralized place to make sense of it all.
Okay, let's dive into this. Fundamentally, a war room is a worldly solution to chaos. It's a dedicated command center designed for a very specific sequence of actions. It collects information, integrates that data to reveal the big picture, analyzes the inherent risks, makes tough decisions under pressure, and finally, issues clear action directives. It is quite literally where you go to see clearly when everything on the outside is just a blur.
So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, what is a war room? Second, multimodal and senses. Third, activating spiritual senses. Fourth, decoding God's language. And finally, the leap of faith. This structure is going to take us all the way from hard data science directly into deeply personal spiritual execution.
All right, part one. What exactly is a war room?
A physical war room doesn't just rely on one single stream of information. It brings in text reports, live satellite imagery, drone video feeds, radar signals, communication logs, and raw sensor data. The presentation refers to this as multimodal information. Think about it. You can't just listen to the radio. You have to see the satellite, read the text, and track the radar simultaneously. Why? Because relying on just a single mode of data in a high-stakes environment creates fatal blind spots. You absolutely need overlapping inputs to verify reality.
Moving right along to part two, multimodal and senses.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact problem with limited inputs. It's the classic analogy of the blind man and the elephant. One man feels the trunk and says, "Oh, it's like a snake." Another feels the leg and says it's a tree trunk. Another feels the side and swears it's a wall. Now, none of them are entirely wrong about their specific data point. But because they're relying on an isolated single mode of perception, their overall conclusion is just completely incorrect. They lack that multimodal big picture.
Interestingly enough, modern AI systems solve this elephant problem using something called PDD, which stands for Pattern Discovery and Disentanglement. When an AI looks at the real world, the data is super messy. It's overlapping, full of static, and deeply entangled. The AI has to actively filter out the noise to find the true underlying pattern. The really fascinating thing about this source material is that it takes this exact AI concept, disentanglement, and parallels it directly to the human need for spiritual discernment. Just like a computer, our minds have to filter out the daily static to find the actual meaningful signals.
Which brings us to section 3, activating spiritual senses.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how directly the presentation translates human biology into spiritual theology. It maps our 5 physical senses to an unquantifiable spiritual war room. So physical eyes map to spiritual eyes that see visions or underlying truths. Ears map to hearing a divine voice or internal prompting. The nose, that maps to discerning the atmosphere of a situation, sensing when something just doesn't smell right. The tongue relates to tasting grace, and physical touch maps to feeling a profound sense of peace or burden. The core argument here is that humans basically have an entirely secondary spiritual sensor suite.
And just as a military war room needs multimodal AI to avoid blind spots, the source argues that a believer needs to activate all these spiritual senses together. If you only rely on a feeling, well, you might be misled, just like the blind man touching the elephant's leg. But if your spiritual sight, hearing, and feeling all align and confirm the very same pattern, then you've achieved multimodal spiritual discernment. The data has been disentangled, and the true signal is crystal clear.
All right, section 4, decoding God's language.
The presentation provides a highly effective, really sticky analogy to explain this, breaking divine communication into 2 Greek concepts, logos and rhema. Think of logos as the universal driving manual.
It gives you the foundational, unchanging rules, right? Red means stop, green means go, always drive the speed limit. It's the written foundational text. Rhema, on the other hand, is your real-time GPS. It's totally dynamic. While you're driving according to the manual, the Rhema suddenly speaks up and says, hey, accident ahead, take the next exit on the right. It is specific, immediate, and situational direction for exactly where you are right now.
So how does this real-time GPS actually communicate? Well, the source lists these specific multimodal ways. It could be through dreams and visions, prophetic words from others, or environmental signs like suddenly opening or closing life opportunities. It might be through specific timing, repeating number patterns, or confirmations from relationships. Again, a single one of these might just be static, but when a spiritual war room parses this overlapping data and sees a repeating pattern across multiple modes, that registers as a clear directive.
To show just how deep the human desire to decode these patterns goes, the source throws in a really surprising historical fact. Even Sir Isaac Newton, literally one of the greatest mathematical and scientific minds in human history, was deeply invested in searching for a Bible code. He spent years trying to mathematically disentangle timelines and symbols from biblical texts, looking for hidden divine patterns. It just goes to show that the drive to process and decode spiritual data is deeply embedded in the human intellect.
Let's move to and see how this builds into our final part. Section 5, the leap of faith.
The presentation introduces this fascinating psychological and spiritual concept, the 90% to 100% principle. The basic idea is that in real-world situations, you are rarely, if ever, going to have 100% of the data or the capability. But if your war room tells you that you possess 90% of the capability, you step up and declare 100%. You commit. You trust that the remaining 10%, that gap, will naturally be filled in once you are actually in motion.
The source frames this as a strategic, faith-driven overpromise. It is the bridge between merely possessing spiritual discernment and actually executing it in the real world. You've used your multimodal inputs, you've disentangled the noise, your real-time GPS has given you a direction, and now, even with a slight margin of uncertainty, you take the leap. The action itself is what completes the final 10% of the whole process.
To bring this entire narrative arc together, the presentation relies on this ancient text from Hebrews. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past. That phrase, various times and in various ways, is essentially the ancient equivalent of multimodal. Long before military radars or AI pattern disentanglement, the source points out that divine communication was already understood to be diverse, overlapping, and complex, ultimately culminating in a single unified message.
So the crucial point is this. We all face chaos. We are all bombarded by overlapping data, static, and noise every single day. And whether you view it through the high-tech lens of AI data processing or the ancient lens of spiritual discernment, you need a mechanism to filter the noise and find the signal. Based on everything we've unpacked today from this presentation, I want to leave you with this question. In the relentless noise of modern life, what does your personal war room look like? How are you processing the data to make the leap? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.